Before the first human empire, before the rise of Iron Kings, before castles, crowns, or written history, there was a time when looking up could mean seeing death or divinity. For in the oldest age of this world, the sky did not belong to birds, nor storms, nor even the sun alone. It belonged to dragons, not the hunted creatures of fading myth, not beasts hiding in caves, not monsters invented to frighten children, but kings, ancient rulers, vast beyond imagination, whose wings darkened valleys, whose voices shook mountains, and whose power was so absolute that the world below did not question it. It adapted, because there was once an age when mankind did not rule the earth. It survived beneath it, beneath shadows large enough to swallow cities, beneath flame powerful enough to melt armies, beneath crowned titans who did not merely fly through the heavens. They governed them. This was the golden age of dragon kings, an era so immense that later civilizations would mistake it for legend. Long before humanity built thrones of gold, dragon kings had already forged thrones from volcanoes. Long before mortal armies marched beneath banners, dragon legions crossed storm fronts. And long before human kings claimed divine right, the first dragon emperor had already united the skies. His true name has been lost, burned from temples, buried beneath ruin, scattered into whispers. But in the oldest surviving fragments, he was known by many titles: the Flame Crown, the Sky Father, the Ashen Sovereign. It was said his wingspan was so vast that when he crossed above ancient kingdoms, entire nations would kneel, believing night had arrived early. Because before his reign, the skies had been chaos. Dragon fought dragon. Fire answered storm. Mountains shattered beneath endless war, until one rose higher, not simply stronger, but wiser. He understood what no dragon before him truly had, that divided skies could still fall. And so, through conquest, diplomacy, blood rights, and celestial law, he did what none believed possible. He united the first brood, the Ember clans of the south, born in volcanoes and ash, the Frost WRMS of the north, silent rulers of ice storms, the storm serpents of the eastern thunder ranges, all ancient, all powerful, all divided, until the first emperor forged them into one. For the first time in history, the skies became one kingdom, and from that impossible unity rose the greatest empire the world would ever witness. The Sky Dominion, a civilization above the clouds. Not crude nests, not savage dens, but an empire. Vast volcanic capitals carved into mountain summits, golden observatories built beyond storm level, bridges spanning impossible peaks, royal chambers lit by rivers of molten stone. This was no age of beasts. This was architecture, law, bloodline, order. Dragon kings ruled from ancient high thrones, each sovereign governing territories so vast that human maps could scarcely contain them. Below, the younger races watched and learned. For humanity, in those distant centuries, was still small. Scattered tribes, early stone cities, fragile walls. Men feared the sky, but they also worshipped it. Some offered gold, others prayer. Many simply bowed, because resistance against something that could burn kingdoms from the clouds was rarely mistaken for bravery, only madness. And yet, despite their terrifying power, the Dragon Kings were not mindless tyrants. At least, not then. Their age was remembered not merely for domination, but for magnificence. Under dragon rule, trade routes below became safer. Ancient roads stretched between mountain shadows. Knowledge spread. astronomy flourished. For dragons studied the stars, not as decoration, but as law. They tracked constellations, solar shifts, comets, tides, and time itself. Some legends claim they were the first beings to truly measure the heavens. And in their highest temples, above thunderclouds, dragon scholars carved celestial maps into obsidian walls, many of which humanity would later rediscover and mistake as its own wisdom. In the southern reaches of the world, where volcanoes breathed endlessly into crimson skies, rose the Ember Court, the most feared and most radiant of all dragon dynasties. Its capital, Cinderhold, was carved into the mouth of an ancient living mountain. There, black towers rose between rivers of molten fire, and vast winged sentinels circled day and night through smoke-filled heavens. At its center stood the pyre throne, a seat not built, but forged, molded from volcanic glass, ancient gold, and the fossilized bones of fallen titans. Upon this throne, the Dragon Emperor ruled, not through noise, not through cruelty alone, but through permanence. For mortals measured power in battles. Dragons measured it in centuries. A human king might reign 50 years and call himself eternal. A dragon king could reign for 800 and still be considered young. Time was their weapon, patience their shield. And beneath that impossible patience, beneath that ancient fire, the world entered its first great age of order. The Dragon Kings did not merely conquer. They organized. Sky laws were written. Bloodline treaties were forged. Sacred territories were honored. But power, even wise power, carries a danger older than flame. For when peace lasts long enough, those born within it begin to mistake it for permanent. And in the halls of Cinderhold, among royal heirs who had never truly seen sky war, a quieter fire had already begun. Ambition, not the ambition to unite, but to surpass, to expand farther, rule harder, burn brighter. The first emperor had forged one kingdom from chaos, but his descendants looked upon that kingdom and saw not completion, but beginning. For the southern Ember princes, heirs to volcanoes and ash, believed flame itself was proof of divine superiority. They had inherited the oldest throne, the richest capital, and the most feared armies. To them, the dominion was not balance. It was inheritance, and inheritance, they believed, should belong more fully to them. In the frozen north, the frost houses thought differently. Ancient, calculating, and patient beyond even dragon custom, they viewed the empire not as conquest, but stewardship. Power, they believed, should be preserved carefully, not expanded recklessly. And in the eastern storm ranges, where lightning crowned impossible peaks, the storm serpents watched. Swift, proud, unpredictable, they had bent the knee to unity, but never fully surrendered their hunger for independence. Thus, beneath the golden peace of empire, three ancient philosophies quietly endured. Flame, which sought dominance. Frost, which sought preservation. Storm, which sought freedom. And though the first emperor still ruled, his wisdom holding old rivalries in check. Time, even for dragons, moved silently. Age gathered. Not weakness, but distance. For the ruler who had once conquered chaos, now spent more centuries in celestial chambers, studying stars, omens, and futures only he seemed to understand. Some said he was preparing for a threat beyond the world. Others whispered that he had seen the first shadow of the dominion's fall. Whatever the truth, his absence from daily rule created space. And where power leaves space, ambition enters. Court factions deepened. Royal heirs gathered loyalists. Ancient generals, once united by conquest, began quietly aligning themselves with bloodlines rather than crown. Not openly. Not yet. For this was not civil war. Not then. This was something softer and far more dangerous. Expectation. Each dynasty began imagining a different future. The Ember heirs imagined an age of greater conquest, where dragon fire would push beyond known continents, and all beneath the sky would kneel fully. The Frost Elders imagined restraint, a longer peace, a carefully balanced dominion that could survive 10,000 years. The Storm Lords imagined fractured sovereignty, powerful allied kingdoms, free beneath one banner, but not chained by it. And beneath these visions, one dangerous question slowly grew. What happens when the first king above all is gone? For the first time in centuries, it was spoken only in whispers. What happens when the first king above all is gone? Never before had dragonkind truly needed to imagine such an ending. The first emperor had always been there. A living mountain, a constant shadow, a force so ancient that many younger dragons believed he was eternal. But even eternity can begin to feel uncertain. The emperor's flights grew rarer, his judgments less frequent. Where once his wings crossed the skies like thunder, now long seasons passed without his shadow. He withdrew instead into the star vaults. Ancient observatories carved above the highest storm line, where fire met starlight and prophecy was studied beside silence. Rumors spread. Some claimed he had discovered a coming darkness in the heavens. Others whispered something far more dangerous, that he was preparing for succession and uncertainty in an empire built upon one ancient crown can be more dangerous than war itself. Across Cinderhold, noble houses grew cautious. Alliances shifted. Ancient generals, once loyal only to unity, began looking more closely at heirs. For if the Pyre throne were ever left empty, it would not remain empty for long. Among the Ember Court, one name began rising above all others. Prince Vaeloris, firstborn of flame. Vast-winged, brilliant, and dangerously ambitious. Vaeloris was everything the southern bloodlines admired. Powerful, fearless, charismatic. He did not see the dominion as finished. He saw it as limited. To him, his father's empire was not the final shape of dragon greatness, but merely the foundation, where the first emperor had united. Vaeloris dreamed of expansion, new continents, new conquests, a sky with no border. And among younger dragons, especially those born long after the Ash Wars, his vision felt intoxicating. But not all shared his hunger. In the northern ice dominions, beneath silver storms and frozen auroras, another heir watched. Lady Serakith of the Frost Wirms. Ancient by mortal standards, disciplined even by dragon measure, and revered not for spectacle, but wisdom. Where Vaeloris burned brightly, Serakith endured cold. She had studied the old wars, the broken mountain chains, the blackened seas, the cost of dragon pride without restraint. To her, expansion was not destiny. It was risk. For every new kingdom conquered, every border stretched, every rival crushed, the balance of the dominion grew thinner. And Serakith understood what many younger dragons did not. Empires rarely fall at their weakest. They fall at the height of their confidence. Thus, while southern courts praised conquest, northern halls spoke quietly of caution. Preserve the sky dominion. Strengthen what exists. Avoid unnecessary fire. To some, this seemed wisdom. To others, cowardice. And then, there were the Storm Lords. Neither fully loyal to Ember ambition nor frost restraint. The Eastern dynasties had always been different. Swift, strategic, and deeply protective of their independence. Their ruler, Lord Zephyron, had no desire to see the dominion collapse, but neither did he wish to see one bloodline, especially fire, rise too far above the others. For if Vaeloris claimed unchecked power, unity could quietly become monarchy, and monarchy could become tyranny. Thus, as one emperor aged, three futures emerged: flame, expansion; frost, preservation; storm, equilibrium. And though no war had yet begun, history had already started to lean. For in royal courts, the most dangerous battles are often fought long before claws are drawn. At feasts, words sharpened. At ceremonies, alliances deepened. At star councils, disagreements once philosophical and above them personal, silent in his celestial observatories, who truly understood the future of dragonkind. Some believed he delayed succession because no heir was ready. Others feared he had foreseen what succession itself would bring. For perhaps his greatest wisdom was not in building empire, but in understanding his children. He had united dragons under one sky. But unity forged by one extraordinary ruler is not always easily inherited, especially when heirs desire not merely to continue greatness, but redefine it. And so centuries of peace slowly entered a new age. Not collapse, not yet, but tension, invisible to mortals below. Human kingdoms still prospered, trade still flourished, dragon shadows still crossed sunrise. To the world, the golden age seemed eternal. But deep within Cinderhold, ancient certainty had begun to crack. Prince Vaeloris gathered supporters among southern generals. Young warlords, and fire-forged noble houses, all inspired by his promise of a greater empire. He spoke not openly of rebellion. That would have been madness. Not while the first emperor still lived. Instead, he spoke of destiny, of unfinished greatness, of horizons beyond current law. He praised his father, while quietly suggesting that peace, though admirable, had made dragonkind slower, softer, less than it could be. And to dragons born in prosperity, who had inherited strength without witnessing ruin, such words were powerful. For those who have never seen devastation, often mistake caution for weakness. Meanwhile, in the north, Serakith prepared differently. She did not gather glory seekers. She gathered historians, ancient generals, skylaw scholars, those who remembered. Within frozen sanctuaries lit by blue fire, she studied the earliest records of the Ash Wars, when dragon pride had nearly shattered the world before unity existed. She understood something many did not. Power expands quickly, but consequences arrive slowly. And slow consequences are often the deadliest of all. So while southern courts celebrated visions of conquest, frost houses strengthened old alliances. Not loudly, not dramatically, but carefully. Ancient treaties were restored. Border oaths were renewed. Northern generals, many old enough to remember the final years before unification, were quietly recalled to influence. For Serakith knew, if balance was ever threatened, preparation would matter more than passion. She did not seek civil war. She feared it. And perhaps that fear was precisely what made her dangerous. Because those who understand destruction often move sooner than those who glorify it. In the eastern storm ranges, where thunder wrapped black peaks in endless cloud, Lord Zephyron watched. He did not burn like Vaeloris. He did not preserve like Serakith. He calculated. The Storm Lord understood that history often favors not the strongest fire, but the best-timed wingbeat. So while Ember heirs rallied hearts, and Frost elders fortified memory, Zephyron gathered knowledge. Messengers crossed mountain skies. Sky scouts tracked shifting loyalties. Storm emissaries attended southern courts, northern rites, and imperial ceremonies. Not to pledge, to observe. For Zephyron understood something perhaps more dangerous than ambition or caution: opportunity. If flame and frost ever truly divided, storm could become kingmaker or survivor. Thus, while other bloodlines prepared for futures they hoped to shape, Zephyron prepared for every future at once. And slowly, almost invisibly, the Dominion changed. Not through open war, not through rebellion, through atmosphere. Conversations grew sharper. Royal feasts became strategic. Festivals once honoring unity began subtly glorifying bloodline pride. Young Ember nobles boasted of conquest. Northern elders warned of forgotten ruin. Storm princes smiled and revealed little. To mortal kingdoms below, nothing seemed different. Dragon shadows still crossed the sun. Trade still flourished. The pyre throne still burned. But beneath the gold, beneath the law, beneath centuries of divine order, ancient fractures were returning. And high above them all, in the silent star vaults, the first emperor watched. Alone, among obsidian star maps, celestial fire, and prophecies older than empire itself, he searched the heavens. For there were signs, written not in politics, but constellations, patterns shifting, stars dimming, ancient alignments returning. Some whispered the emperor was seeking wisdom for succession. Others feared he was searching for something worse, a warning. For the oldest prophecy of the first brood spoke not of invasion from man, nor beast, nor sea, but of a day when dragonkind itself would forget why it united. And when that day came, the sky would no longer belong to kings. It would burn. At first, such prophecy was dismissed by younger bloodlines as ancient fear, a relic of older centuries, a warning forged in harsher times, when chaos still felt close enough to matter. But to those who remembered, prophecy was not superstition. It was memory. For dragonkind, unlike man, did not preserve history merely through writing. It preserved history through survivors. Ancient beings still lived, who had witnessed the final horrors of divided skies. Elders whose scales still bore scars from the ash wars. Veterans who remembered mountains collapsing, oceans boiling, and entire bloodlines erased beneath pride. And among those oldest survivors, unease began to spread. Not because war had started, but because the language before war had returned. Honor, inheritance, superiority, words that seemed noble until sharpened by power. Within Cinderhold, debates once centered on stewardship now increasingly turned toward future dominance. Should the Dominion expand? Should one bloodline lead more absolutely? Should old restrictions, forged during desperate centuries, still bind a stronger generation? Questions became factions. Factions became movements. And movements, eventually, become history. Prince Vaeloris, brilliant and adored, grew ever bolder. He still spoke with elegance, still honored his father publicly. But his vision was changing from suggestion to expectation. He argued that peace without expansion was stagnation, that strength restrained too long became weakness, that dragonkind, rulers of heaven itself, had no rightful reason to remain confined by old caution. And for many, especially the young, it was difficult not to listen. For ambition, when spoken by greatness, can sound like evolution.